Hello and welcome to our webinar live from UKFast today in Manchester. Thank you for joining us. Today we are talking about how to prevent cyber attacks before they happen. My name is Arlene Bulfin. I am Director of People Development at UKFast and part-time webinar host. I haven't been here for a while, but they invited me back, so a good sign. Today we're going to really look at what's new in the security world for 2020. We are going to look at the expected to the surprising. There's always something surprising in cyber security, and we've put together a fabulous lineup of experts for you today. So Holly, we're going to kick off with you. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name's Holly Grace Williams. I'm the Technical Director at Sakama. We're a cybersecurity consultancy that specialises in penetration testing.
Brilliant. Martin?
I'm Martin. I'm from the Defence Works and we're a security awareness training company based in Salford.
I'm Greg Vandergast. I'm still the Head of Information Security at the University of Salford.
Good sign.
That's it, yeah. So far, so good.
And David?
David Parkinson. I'm part of the technology team at Sapphire. We're a security consultancy working with clients across the UK.
Brilliant. Based in Manchester, Sapphire?
Actually headquartered in Darlington with offices in Glasgow and Basingstoke.
Wow, so good spread across
Absolutely.
the country nationally. Great stuff. So let's jump into it today. So quite a general cybersecurity webinar today, but you will all know that we have a lot of SMEs that watch our webinars. So today I'm going to ask you firstly, small businesses, do they tend to think that they are less likely to be attacked by, with a cyber attack?
Who's going to start?
Yes, those that haven't done correct threat modelling will not think that they're a target. They will be proven wrong. Yeah, it's a bit of a stereotype that small organisations might think, you know, we're not interesting enough, we're not important enough to be targeted. However, there's a lot of evidence against that. So just things like the WannaCry attack of 2017, where a lot of organisations were hit almost as collateral damage. They were hit just because they were vulnerable. Or if you consider attacks like ransomware, where they don't really care who the organisation is. If they've got money in the bank, they want to relieve that organisation of that money.
So size doesn't matter, Holly, in this instance.
Nope.
Tell us, you know, you said threat modelling there straight away as an example. To me, as a small business, that sounds expensive. Is that expensive? Do I have the resource to invest in protecting my business?
I'm sure the rest of the panel will have some opinions on that, but my initial thoughts would be, yes, these things can be expensive. Consider things like SOCs, or consider things like threat intelligence. There are very, very expensive offerings, but if you're a small organisation, you probably don't need that complexity and scale, so that the price can scale accordingly. Many of the things you can actually do in-house, presuming you have even just a small IT team.
Brilliant, and we'll definitely come back to that today. That's important.
If I may, because
please.
I think they probably wouldn't know what threat modelling is. So
that's why I said it sounds expensive.
That's the thing. And it depends what, you know, when we say SMEs, we can talk, you know, mom and pop 5 employees, or we can talk, you know, 100 million revenue is still considered an SME.
SME, yeah.
But, you know, even if you break it down into common sense stuff, it's just that awareness of, you know, you are still connected to the internet, you have value. Someone, you know, some teenager somewhere, just for the fun of it, will wipe out your network, because I used to do that stuff. So. And you get to brag to your friends, so you're still exposed. So just having the awareness that there is that exposure is the first step.
That's really important, isn't it?
And
Yeah,
think,
like we said, you're vulnerable at any size. Were you going to say something, David? Yeah.
I think there's something to be said about it's the type of company as well. So I know some, I'm sure we all do, know some very small companies in terms of number of people who are responsible for managing huge, you know, wealth funds, etc. And they may be in regulated industries, they may not be, but as some of these very small pockets of expertise get going and start to scale, I think that's where we see a lot of the problems starting, because a lot of the cybersecurity issues stem from IT operations, which become very difficult to scale quite quickly if you don't get that structure in place at an early stage.
In an early stage.
So.
When you're thinking about, you know, setting up a business and all of the other pressures that come with that, you're not thinking about building in a security infrastructure that's going to scale with your business.
I think one of the points on scaling there, if you consider blitz scaling and growth hacking, where organisations are putting a lot of effort into their marketing side of things and building that brand, you can think a company will be, you know, startup stage, wanting to go viral, right? So that they get the attention. if you're a politically motivated attacker and you want to put a political message out there, if they go viral and then you deface their website, you get way, way more impact from that. So even if you're a tiny organization, there's risks like that. You know, you're not the target, you're just a method of getting the message out.
Yeah.
A pawn.
We had recently, you guys actually helped with it. One woman-man business. I believe she placed staff for luxury cruise liners, yachts, that kind of thing. And you know, she's just a one-person business, but she had 16,000 passports, and it got compromised when the developer didn't lock down.
Yeah.
Their
My favorite example of kind of tiny organization that everyone's heard of, when Instagram sold to Facebook, they had 13 employees. So everyone, like, Instagram's huge, right? And they had a huge valuation when they sold, but they were tiny.
Wow. I think it's interesting, Holly, you mentioned it there, you know, it's not just, and David, you then highlighted as well, as a business, it's not just monetary value, well, it's the data that can become valuable. So passports, it's data. If you're an organisation that holds any type of data, which every organisation does, should be a worry for you. We mentioned common sense as well, Martin. This is where you come in, isn't it? We bring you to remind us that everyone needs help with common sense. So tell us a little bit about what you guys do.
Yes, certainly. So obviously a large part of the people that I speak with are SMEs in that sort of 10 to 100 user space. And it's just interesting, obviously, for a lot of these companies, cost is like the biggest issue when looking at to implement certain initial security awareness pieces. But awareness and culture is a very easy thing to get put in from the ground up. It's one of the cheapest things you can actually do to start off with. And it's even easier to keep going as you grow. So, really, as like an initial start to your, cybersecurity journey, that's really where you should start. For me, with the common sense stuff that we talk about so commonly with, obviously like checking emails twice, and it's not come from the business, or should I just click on this link? It's such common, easy stuff to do. But if you've not looked at it from what importance you're gonna put on culture and how, you can have different staff. It doesn't just have to be the IT departments. Core concern. We've really been pushing the last couple of months, getting, representatives from the HR department, from the training and development side, from marketing, and all sort of working on an initial security strategy. As obviously we're getting a lot more different inputs and different sort of trains of thought on how they can get a very simple message out to the whole company. So that's really quite cost-effective stuff, but it's just getting started as soon as you can in sort of your business life cycle, and you can really be in a lot better position as you grow.
And a lot easier to define a culture from the beginning and then grow that out, rather than trying to change a culture into a far larger organisation.
I can feel a lot more disingenuous when you sort of do like, oh, we think it's valuable now. Now we think it's worth doing, but from the start, wasn't that important.
I'm surprised to hear you do it in such small organizations, because I'm seeing like the big organizations, before you get to the SOCs and the processes and the frameworks and all that stuff, the most important thing is culture. And security people think that means, user awareness. No, it's just general culture of transparency, of caring for the organization, of collaborating, of IT working with security and vice versa, and with the business, and knowing what's actually going on. That kind of thing is such an enabler. So it's interesting to hear it that because I do believe it's the foundation. It's where you really have to start. So I'm glad to see that small businesses are doing that, because as we said before, like the most important thing is, whatever you want to call it, it's just that awareness of, hey, we are exposed to this. We do need to address this. This is a
this is
real
everyone's
concern.
job. Yeah, everyone's responsibility.
Well, yeah, certainly, I think the SMEs are at the biggest risk, but the ones that really know. So by the time they're speaking with me, that's why they're sort of so interested in trying to get that culture established once they've sort of at the level where they're looking to incorporate that security awareness training. But obviously, the organisations that are living in sort of a blissful ignorance, those are the real risk, and those are ones who probably, like you said, really don't think they're in much danger at all. And that one is quite a large majority, but we are starting to see more and more that SMEs are. When they start to care, they're really looking at it from everyone, not just the IT department.
Brilliant.
Cool.
What do you think then, and maybe there's two questions in this, what are the biggest threats facing businesses in 2020 in the world of cyber, and are they different for small businesses? Maybe, Holly, come back to you. So is it the biggest cybersecurity threats facing businesses?
The problem there, from my point of view, is define biggest, right, and define the sector that we're working on, because biggest threat isn't necessarily most common threat. And there's a thing there where if you're going to be investing in security, should you be blocking the highest impact, or should be the highest frequency? And getting that right is a real challenge.
Yeah.
So we see really, really common attacks like ransomware. It's really well known and it's been around for 3 decades. But there are other attacks that could be taking place, or developments on new attacks. We're talking about things like deep fakes, which is a modification on social engineering.
Fakes.
And those things are new or emerging, whereas a lot of organizations are struggling with the old stuff, and that's driving a part of the reason why we see ransomware so frequently, is because from the attacker's point of view, from the criminal's point of view, it's working.
It's working, yeah. It's easy. It's tried and tested.
Low effort, that's a big thing. So if an attacker can deploy ransomware, there's very little effort from their point of view in monetizing that. If you compare that to something like blackmail, where you have to gather something that's compromising on a person and then convince them that you have that thing and then demand a ransom, it's way more effort. Whereas if you just drop some malicious software which infects a series of machines, it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
So that's the reason that we see a lot of smaller organizations hit, because if we can just go in, drop some malware and move on, we can hit a significantly higher number of organizations. So
just
there's
push
a balance
it out.
there. The biggest threats, I would be looking at biggest in terms of probability or impact. That's 2 different things.
Yeah. What do you guys think? Biggest threats?
So I think it's this entire thing about frequency and impact is that whole discussion about risk. And every organisation has to take a decision about the risk and the mitigations that they're willing to put in place for themselves. So Holly mentioned deep fakes there is something that's very emerging. We talked earlier about... and that's really a compromise, and it could be a compromise which damages your brand, for example, rather than impact in terms of direct financial loss.
Yeah.
And for small businesses, we talked before, I think Instagram, I think you mentioned before, where brand is super important to them. If you're a small business and the biggest risk to you is loss of control of your brand, that could instantly take you. Now, that involves that small organisation not placing the perceived highest risk against their funds. It's actually something that is a bit more intangible. So it is a hard question that you've posed, unfortunately, and it is that kind of frequency, impact and risk discussion.
Yeah.
I think. And it's difficult for small organisations.
Threat modelling, that is what that is. So I used that term earlier and we didn't really define it, but that's what that is. It's looking at the types of threat actors that are out there. So that could be politically motivated attackers, nation-state attackers, organised criminals, or bored teenagers in basements, of course.
Greg.
And then the capabilities that they have. So which are most likely to target your organisation, and when they target you, what is it that they're likely to do? So for a lot of organisations, being targeted by nation-states is unlikely.
Yeah.
Therefore, they maybe shouldn't be putting significant investment into that area if they're more likely to be hit by organised criminals, for example. So yeah, it's that, absolutely.
It's that personalised approach.
I think we have, there's a number of interesting things here. I'll mention, I'm not terribly interested about zero-day vulnerabilities because they're incredibly rare. Even the NSA is as a nation state, we've not seen one being used in 24 months. But you mentioned that to security people and they lose their freaking minds. It's about 75% of your estate is vulnerable, is missing critical patches.
Yeah.
But they're not too concerned about that. But if you mention you're not worried about 0 day, they go absolutely
that's such a huge
bonkers.
thing. So it's the Department of Defense that said on an unclassified network they've not seen a 0 day used in 24 months. And if they're not getting hit, if nation states aren't getting hit,
what are the odds of you getting hit? Exactly.
Then most organisations aren't getting hit.
But I think
when you look at the frequency of attacks over time, and you pull up any example, WannaCry, NotPetya, Equifax getting hit. They are new vulnerabilities, but not 0 days, right? So these are vulnerabilities that
at the least.
Yeah. So WannaCry was about 60 days that vulnerability had been had a patch available for when the attack took place.
But we've known it was a weak service for 12 years beforehand.
Oh yeah,
that you shouldn't have been using. Basically, it's
so 0 day. We need a glossary to go along with this webinar. 0 day is something there's no vulnerability or there's no patch for, a vulnerability
basically,
that is brand new that nobody knows anything about.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well,
you basically can't defend yourself against it
because there's no solution.
But the thing is they're extremely valuable because sometimes it's a vulnerability people don't know about. But if you breach something, they're going and investigate, and then they're going to find out how you got it. So you've thrown that advantage away. So nation states will develop them, find them, and then use them extremely sparingly. They're not going to use them against you.
Against.
But I think the stuff that we're seeing, and you mentioned this in some of your talks, it's patches that are years old, or it's flavor of the month that or not even the month, but typically like something will come out, a patch comes out, and 3 or 4 months later, someone's able to download some code and exploit that vulnerability, because 4 months later, most companies still haven't patched it.
And that's good news, isn't it? That's good news for people who are watching this, because patch your systems. That's, to follow the advice.
Well,
and because you speak, I've seen you, Holly, a couple of times speak about the Equifax scandal, and it's mind-blowing. This is such a massive company and with such resource to put into security. And
I think that frustrates me in that area is that people talk about patching as basic security, right? And people say things like, patch your stuff. It's really easy to stand on a stage and say, patch your things. It is
patch
difficult.
Your things. Yeah, there you go, Holly.
It's difficult to scale. Why are organizations struggling with it? Because it's difficult to scale. And we have protections in place. So really simple things like vulnerability scanning, which can monitor a network and pick up any time the patching system has failed.
Yeah.
And there's difficulties with those. If the vulnerability scanner is not hitting the whole range that you own as an estate discovery issue, then you can miss things. And that's what happened in the Equifax case. It was a big part of that. Wasn't that they weren't aware of the vulnerability because CERT had reached out to them and told them. That's a US government organization essentially is the easiest way of thinking it. They had told them, hey, this vulnerability is new, you should check your systems for it, and they thought they had checked their systems. They just missed it.
Do you think it's easier for smaller businesses?
Not necessarily. So patching is difficult at scale, where you have a lot of systems, it becomes harder, but you tend to have bigger teams. A smaller organization might have a smaller team. So it's not necessarily that small companies shouldn't worry about this. But small companies definitely should be aware of it as an issue. One of the hard things for companies that are using lots of different systems, lots of different kinds of software is just becoming aware, right? So it's a big point that Greg made there was, a new vulnerability comes out, flavor of the month vulnerability, and then there's a publicly available attack tool, right?
Yeah.
Companies should be looking into how do we become aware that not only is a patch available, but is an exploit tool available? Are attackers using us? And then that start falling into the problem of threat intelligence then, right?
Because personally, I had a debate with threat intelligence. It's kind of like, I don't really care that much about it if I go and I patch my stuff. And you've hit, people are missing stuff because they're simply not aware of it.
Yeah.
And I think we can't just say, well, sometimes you miss stuff because you're not aware. It's like, no, you should address the problem that you're not becoming aware of them. I was talking 2 weeks ago tomorrow, I was talking to one of the guys, I'm not going to name the company, but it was one of the 5 big ones with 9-figure losses of the last couple of years. And they were investigating the breach, and they were doing some discovery on the network, and at some point they reached a switch, and they asked the security team, what's connected to this switch? They didn't know. It was an entire company they bought 6 years before. An entire company with hundreds of endpoints, and no one ever had a cup of coffee to talk to someone to discover this. So as long as we're just building SOCs and handling millions of alerts and not actually going out and talking to people, like you should get involved in your contracting department, your procurement, all your projects, everything, so you have the feedback to actually know what you're supposed to be protecting. Yeah. It's not enough to just sit there and say nobody told us. Like you got to be proactive, and if you did that, most of these breaches would have been caught, because it's as simple as, had we known about that network, then we would have deployed that patch, and then it wouldn't have an issue. The cost of that is zero. It's coffee. I mean, Costa's going to make some money off of it, but that's about it.
There's another world to go down there, isn't there, around mergers and acquisitions and organisations coming together, which you think about only being the domain of large organisations, but I know we're talking about smaller organisations. You mentioned Instagram, 13 people.
Yeah.
They do come together. We see councils coming together, councils coming together. We see lots of organisations coming together, many of which you would class as small organisations. At what point do people enter into those discussions sometimes about...
Never.
Sometimes never.
It's shocking. It's really shocking.
Is the deal put together on the golf course, and whoever is responsible for IT or security, corporate security, brand, whatever, ever mentioned? Or are they engaged?
Probably not.
Even if they do, mergers and acquisitions are complicated. And even if they're aware that they've had that and their systems are different, a lot of security people will say, standardization is a great thing, having one process across an organization is a great thing, and having a merger is one way to make sure that you don't have standardization, right?
Well, the interesting, like with Marriott, you could tell with the way the breach unfolded that they acquired Starwood years before, but they still had not started to homogenize or standardize anything. They had passport data here, they had passport data there, that was discovered a week later after the breach, which tells me in 4 years they never went through the trouble of, hey, where is our data and what should we be securing?
Exactly.
They never asked that question. So that concerns me because, okay, you did a merger without telling me, and I now have these 500 extra servers and stuff, but the next thing I'm going to do is find out what's going on, not say, well, I wasn't doing that before, I'm not going to start doing that now, and just ignore a quarter of my new infrastructure. It's that lack of engagement that's just really, really worrying to me.
I reckon we could do a whole webinar on maybe mergers and acquisitions and
Absolutely.
security. Yeah,
Because
Larry, write that down.
sometimes we talk about thinking as an attacker when we're helping our clients go through this.
Yeah.
And as an attacker, I would love to go after mergers and acquisitions because we're very good at shouting about it. We're very good at advertising our successes in bringing organisations together. I've sold my business, brilliant, etc. So there's a great advertising pool of those.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of processes, as you say, processes that are coming together and don't really quite fit yet. You might have people whose loyalties are a little bit divided, maybe.
There's a huge point there. There's a huge point on So I'm of a similar mindset to Greg here in terms of the security mindset. One of the biggest things that you want to do is you want to get in there and make sure that systems are standardized, that you're aware of things. However, anyone who works on the business side and talks about acquisition says one of the worst things to do when you acquire a company is to immediately go in there and start changing things and monitoring things and those kinds of things because there's going to be a cultural clash.
Yeah.
And they'll worry about, well, if we start messing with everything, then staff are going to leave, they're going to be disgruntled, those kinds of things. So that's hard.
You should at least be curious about it and document what's there.
I think you
that
can
seems
do
like
it.
a minimum.
I think you can do it still, and you can get involved.
You
And what
can,
you're
but
saying
most of these companies didn't.
having,
That's what blows my
having a
mind.
coffee with the person is a little bit different to coming in and being like, right, here's ISO 27000, you
Yeah.
need to
Yeah,
implement
you
this
need
way
to
and
get
do
this.
it.
That's heavy.
But it needs to be controlled. It's really easy to say you should standardize security, you should get in there and see what they're doing and see if it's right. From the business side of things, it needs to be controlled.
Yeah, you need to control that. Really interesting. I think we could definitely do a whole webinar on that. Let me bring you back in the room now.
Sorry.
Let me take you all back. Holly, you mentioned ransomware, and like you said, it's been around for 3 decades. You must love still talking about it. But what can businesses do to protect themselves from ransomware attacks, do you think?
Can somebody else take that?
Yeah.
before
I was going to say, just because I've been on one of these before, do you ever have some of these without ransomware being mentioned?
No, it's like GDPR. We get points
it's
every time we
pretty
mention
much-
certain things. We play webinar bingo.
Oh, okay. Can we do shots instead? Who wants to talk about ransomware?
I absolutely will.
briefly.
But I'll probably have a controversial view on it.
I mean, because
Go on.
most of the time it's exploiting vulnerabilities that are, should have been patched, or sometimes you can't help it because a user actually ran it themselves. But then you find, well, why did they have local admin? Or why was their image not for it? Why did they have administrative access to hundreds of shares they didn't need access to? Allowing it to spread to 1,000 shares instead of the 3 that user should have used for their job. You can contain it. There are basic tools where if you notice like a ton of, sometimes you do need some tooling obviously, and detecting that you've got 1 million files that are just about to change state and to block that request is not a complex operation. So there's a lot of stuff you can do. And yeah, no one checks their backups either, or they leave them online.
Yeah. So, two things to pull out from what Greg said there. The first one, absolutely right. If a user can click a link in an email and it can bring your entire organization down, the problem is not the user clicking the email. The problem is the way that you have built your systems. A user should not be able to have that level of impact. In terms of backups is becoming a harder problem. When ransomware was first deployed, and it would hit what it could, it'd lock it out, you could recover from backup and that would be fine. A lot of these attacks are now developing where the attacks are manual. So you want a good example of that? The SamSam attack group. They hacked organizations manually and deployed ransomware at inopportune moments. So they can do things like getting access to backups, disrupting backups, either turning them off, destroying them, or infecting them. There's those worries. So simply saying backups is a bit of a difficulty. But one of the things, and this is a biased view, penetration testing is going to help, right? look at the pen tester saying penetration testing is going to help.
Surprise, surprise.
Really good example of that. Major attack 2017, NotPetya. NotPetya spread incredibly quickly within 90 minutes, and it did that using Mimikatz style techniques. Mimikatz is a tool that pen testers use. It's been around for a very, very long time. Since at least 2011, it has had that capability to spread in that way. That's a known attack. Like Greg says, a lot of this comes down to vulnerabilities that we know about. Getting a pen test team to come in and see how quickly they can compromise systems will help. I think the only caveat that I would put on that is when you're building those scenarios and you're getting security professionals to come in and take a look at your systems, make sure that the scenario that they're trying to play out is appropriate. Is the pen tester going to come in and play the malicious staff member game, and they're going to do disgruntled staff member and try and compromise the system from that point of view? Or are they going to try and simulate what ransomware could do and hit as many systems as they can in as short a space of time as they can? If you don't have those conversations with your security testers or your auditors, maybe you're just playbooking the wrong things.
Yeah. So again, that's really important to look at your own individual business and what you're most at risk for. Yeah, brilliant. What do you think, Martin, maybe come to you, because, we always think about education when we bring you here. What, for this year, with the companies that you're working with, what are you focusing on in terms of cybersecurity?
Well, I say none of the stuff we've discussed today has really been new, but there's new people coming in to the organisation every day. New idiots are born every day.
Every day.
So, looking at what you're doing in regards to just new people coming in, as you say, if you're a really small company, even if you've only got 10 people, does every member of staff know what ransomware is? Just as do a little poll. I guarantee, there'll be some companies that have a Margaret in accounts or a new intern who will, never have covered it ever in their life, and just even.
Why are you picking on Margaret?
Well, Margaret's not been pulling away.
John in accounts for the gender balance.
There we go. Steve the intern.
Yeah, Steve the intern.
Stupid Steve.
Either way, if you just really start at a real basic awareness level, and then that can really be a good foundation to, as you say, start getting those conversations. You might just see, Margaret from accounts might just ask one of the IT security professionals, "Oh, what do we do for ransomware? How do we stop that?" And then potentially, if one of those leaves, or if you might get an external company in, it just gets more people just go, "Oh, what do we do? Have we done anything for that for the last 4 years?" Or
That's, by the way, a great way of getting a security discussion going at board level. What's our policy on ransomware? Do we pay it out or not? And what's our budget? And all of a sudden they're like, what do you mean? What should we? What's all this stuff?
The NCSC's board toolkit covers that. It's one of the questions that the board should be able to answer. How are we mitigating the risk of ransomware? And I think a lot of boards wouldn't be able to answer that, but that's one of their 5 you should be able to.
Brilliant. So that's a kit available from the NCF to anyone?
NCSC's board toolkit. Google it, you'll probably get it, but ncsc.gov, you'll pick it up pretty quickly.
Brilliant.
It's an awareness tool for boards, which is a little bit different to the perspective that you were saying, but the whole organisation should have some awareness of what it is, ransomware, and other threats, and how they're expected to handle
Most people are not stupid, they're just unaware.
And if nothing else, this kind of opens up the conversation to the board and the business about security being an economic thing that they have to, that will bring it home. So you might start with a conversation about, do we pay ransomware, what's the budget? But actually, it opens up the whole discussion from, it's not a technical thing anymore, and it's not some fluffy brand thing. It's actually, how do we quantify this as a business? And therefore, how do we, again, it's mitigating those risks, isn't it, for the business? I think there's another interesting thing, just to come back to the ransomware thing. We talk about the economics from the business point of view in defending, but I think we've also got to remember that the attackers are playing the economics game at the moment. I mean, we're seeing a lot of broad brush ransomware stuff at the moment because that's the cheapest, most effective way for a lot of attackers to monetize their attacks. But I think Holly mentioned just before, you see these sort of attacks now that are getting a bit more
targeted,
personalized. And they're still using ransomware technologies to be able to do it. But I think, as you mentioned, taking out backups first. We've seen attacks in the past where attackers have, maybe in larger organizations, but have manipulated a news cycle by splitting up phases of their attack so it suits them for their biggest impact, whether they're a hacktivist, etc. But in that case, if you could get in you can take out the online backups, etc., and then hit, you're going to make a bigger return. I'd be interested to see what others think, but I suspect we're going to also find a point where it makes more sense to maybe remove the data and then maybe auction some of it off to other interested parties, and maybe we'll get to a point where that's a bigger return than just encrypting and asking for
I think that's possibly another thing there as well. I do think that's a thing that's going to start happening. We've seen it in a couple of examples, the Travelex breach, and for example, where the attackers are allegedly taking data, and it could be that they intend to sell that data, so they put it on the dark web and say, hey, here's some payment cards, there's some personal data. Or alternatively, it might just be leverage against the organisation. If the organisation is thinking, should we pay, should we not pay, if they have personal data and could release it, then they're also thinking, well, think about GDPR
they've done that
fines.
before now.
Absolutely. And it's the economics.
Leverage.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. If you've got a big target or even a smaller, a big target, most SMEs, I mean, you have those small SMEs that have tremendous financial value. It could work there as well. But and this is why SMEs should be worried. Most of it is just pray and spray. I mean, you'll have botnets of 100,000 hosts just trying, eternal blue vulnerabilities everywhere to see if they can deploy WannaCry. It doesn't, they don't even know who you are when they infect you most of the time. I think that's going to be your typical SME scenario, and that's why it's so important to get that basic hygiene in. But there are definitely some very sophisticated attacks going on as well.
No, I think that we could play lots of scenarios out, but I think there's those kind of data integrity attacks as well, where if I get into Greg's data and I change some data, I tell you and I prove that I've changed some data, but you don't know how much of that data.
Another thing, can you hack an organisation, cook their books, and then not tell them, and they'll find out about it when they're audited?
Exactly, it's that kind of integrity attack.
Wow.
Yes.
Interesting. From a security perspective as well, I was talking to the CEO of Cyber Reason back in December, and he was former Mossad in that unit. And we asked him, so what was your... And he was explaining the whole history of it, the whole 5, 7 eyes things, and the U.S. was able to tap global communications, everything. And Israel couldn't do that. Israel had to go hack into places and get their intelligence that way. So that's how they developed that capability. And it was like, what was your success rate? And he's like, what do you mean? What percentage of the time did you actually get in? Every time. Every single time we wanted to hack into something, we could do it. And it was like, well, what about all the security tooling and the seams and the logs and stuff? Oh, they're great. We use them. We fake the logs, manipulate and implement, make them look over here while we ransack over there.
That's a really good point, actually. If you bring that down from nation-state level attacks to, what should small and medium organisations care about? Should we be thinking, as a tiny startup, what if Mossad hacks us? But what you mentioned there is a complex attack, right? As an attacker, if I want to steal data from an organisation without them noticing, I could perform a really, really loud attack elsewhere. So something like a denial of service attack on an unrelated system. Their IR team stands up, or they're calling their help desk, their third party provider, saying, hey, we're getting attacked here, please help us out, and nobody's paying attention to the data exfiltration.
Wow.
That's not only nation-state attacks that can happen at a small scale.
It makes sense. Yeah. It makes perfect sense.
They had it to the level where they could tell which of the analysts were good in the SOC. And when they were on duty, they would cause a lot of noise to make him work a 16-hour shift. That way they knew the next day he wouldn't be there, and that's when they went in for the kill.
Wow. Guys, David.
I think
We've just geeked out quite a bit, sorry.
I think this all sounds really kind of scary, but to bring it back down to SME level, I think that the things...
Thank you, David.
That we talked about,
save us from ourselves.
We save us from ourselves. I think that the thing to take away from this is that there are some very complex attacks which are possible. It's possible to scale those down. It's an economics thing for the attackers to work out how they're going to get best and most easily paid today. That could well change over the next 12, 24 months, and we'll see different types of attacks. And as an SME, I think it's incumbent on the management, on the owners, in a lot of cases, to make themselves aware, spread that culture from an early point, and understand where your strengths are and where you need some help as well. So, as an SME of whether it's 5, 20, 10, 20, 50 people, whatever, you can't possibly run your business and do what it is that you do and take care of all these things as well. And that's where I think it's also important to kind of bring in your third parties, just as you would with accountants, you know, with you know, your corporate security guys, etc.
I think you've got frequency and you've got sophistication. So it tends to be the sophisticated stuff is actually really, really rare. It's the cool stuff we make movies about. Chances are you're going to get hit by the broad, just spamming the internet with attacks and scanning and looking for vulnerabilities on just anything that's connected. So the good news is most attacks that SMEs are going to get hit by, or even most big corporations, are relatively easy to fix. SMEs have the advantage that they're more likely to kind of know themselves, to have visibility to the entire business and not miss things if they do it intelligently. So if you just get that basic hygiene, and that's where you get the highest ROI and the lowest spend, if you can get that right, just some good awareness of what the basics are and make sure you've got a solid foundation there, you'll probably be fine.
Greg, we have to leave it there, don't we, on that? You'll probably be fine. You've taken us on a wild journey, as always, security experts. Thank you very much. And we've got some more webinars lined up on the back of that one now then, don't we? So thanks to you for watching. Hopefully that didn't blow your mind too much, and it gives you some good things to go away and think about in terms of your cybersecurity for your business. Thanks for joining us, and see you again soon.